Good morning, church. Thank you, Murray. As Murray has said, we're continuing our series on practicing the way of Jesus. But specifically today, we're going through what would Jesus do, or what did he did? Eating and drinking, radically ordinary hospitality. But as a trainer, as you all know, I do training for Department of Fire and Emergency Services. We always like to recap where we've gone. So I want everyone to go. What is one thing that you've remembered from this series so far? Obviously, we started out last year, had the holiday break, but what's one of these things that has really meant for you for this series? And to jog your memory, I'm always told chocolate is a good idea. So I'll get Murray to dispensate the chocolate. So hit me with it. What's one of the things that this series has meant to you over the course of the last few months?
That we need to practice silence and solitude.
Awesome.
And have a sabbatical.
Anyone else?
I'm waiting for the Kit Kat.
Well, you can never be happy. Last time we had Turkish Delight, and some people didn't like that. So what's another thing that the series has meant to you?
Forgiveness.
We've definitely covered a whole pile of subject matter, which is great, with a whole pile of different speakers bringing their personality to it and allowing God to speak through them. Is there anyone else want to share what this series has meant to them? Yes, Jane?
We're apprentices.
Yes. Anyone else?
We're all being formed,
Yes.
and we're either being formed intentionally or unintentionally.
Or both?
Or both.
Nothing else? Okay. Thank you, Murray. Mate, have one for yourself.
Have the whole thing.
As we saw today, in the story of Zacchaeus, how many times do we talk to our neighbours, our work colleagues, people in the street, and don't know how to bring the subject round to Zacchaeus? How do we know to have those conversations with colleagues? I know I have had many conversations, and I haven't been the one to bring up the topic. They have, because they know that I'm a Christian. But I'm also conscious of the fact that I don't know the answer, or I didn't know how to answer at that time. In Perth 2024, do we know how to talk to our neighbours? We are not alone. But how do we invite people to be with us in this world? We that are Christians experience life to the full in Jesus. We have in our hearts the light and life. And how do we share that? Today we will unpack this and focus on eating and drinking. We find in the passage today that Jesus invited himself to Zacchaeus' house. He wasn't invited, he invited himself. Was it because Jesus loved short people? Was it that he was going on a fundraising bent and wanted to get money out of the richest people of Jericho? No, he wanted to save the lost. In that day and age, as we found in the video, tax collectors were dangerous to know and to communicate with. You did not associate with them. The culture of the time, there was two tiers of morality. You had the tax collectors, the prostitutes, and then you had everyone else. Who is in the bottom of your list today that you would feel upset or worried if you saw Jesus associating with them? we have this meal that Zacchaeus had with Jesus, and in Bible times, meals meant more than it does today. Meals were both exclusive and inclusive. They had a table fellowship. They didn't have Netflix or Disney or Foxtel. They had a table. In Jesus' day, eating together meant a lot culturally. It was the primary way of marking a significant event, whether that be a birthday, anniversary, or a significant festival. To share a table with another person was making a social statement about yourself and your guest. One of the New Testament scholars, Scott Barchi, writes, "It would be difficult to overestimate the importance of table fellowship for the cultures of the first century. Mealtimes were far more than occasions for individuals to eat. Being welcomed at a table for the purpose of eating food for another person became a ceremony richly symbolic of friendship, intimacy, and unity. Betrayal or unfaithfulness towards anyone with who one had shared a table was viewed as unacceptable. On the other hand, when persons were estranged, a meal invitation opened the way to reconciliation." Table fellowship, a fellowship before God. A table like the one that is laid out for us today, that is sustenance for our body, and also the communion, which is sustenance for our soul. In the passage today, the last line in verse 10, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." We are the lost, so he came to seek and to save us. Now, if you go back to Jesus' time, it was not a land of technology. It was an oral society. Important passages, rituals, rules, information was recited by leaders and apprentices, and the people would listen and repeat it. The early church continued this by sharing the letters from Paul, from John, the Gospels. And as for the Son of Man, we hear throughout the New Testament. And one passage is such, which may not be a good example, but it shows that it's used in a lot of different areas. In Luke 7:33 to 35, "For John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, and you say he is a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and you say, here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." Not a way that you'd think that you would use for the Son of Man came. But we all know that he had his distractors when he was alive. And also now in his being in heaven. Another way that we tend to look at, and a lot of our passages today are from Luke. Who remembers in Luke 7 when Jesus is anointed by the sinful woman? We find in that story that Jesus tends to use that as another example. He's there, he's invited this time. He hasn't invited himself to the Pharisee's house, Simon the Pharisee. And he turns what Simon doesn't do to a idea of what we should be doing and a reminder of what we should do. In verse 44, Then he turned towards the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair." We all know that it was a common practice back in those times that if you had someone coming over, you would have a jug or a bucket of water for people to wash their feet. Especially since back then they didn't have cars, they didn't have bitumen roads, they had sandy roads. So you needed to keep your feet clean when you're walking to someone else's house. And it moves on into verse 45. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. What does Scott Barchi say? Being welcomed at a table for the purposes of eating food with another person became a ceremony richly with symbolic of friendship, intimacy, and unity. And it moves on with some more. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my head. Another sign of love. And perfume back then wasn't as cheap as it is today. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has forgiven little, lives little, loves little. What did we see in verse 10 of the Zacchaeus story? He came to seek the lost and to save them. The Lord routinely does that, forgives our sins each and every day. As we see throughout the Bible, eating and drinking is the rule, not the exception. In Luke alone, there are 50 references to Jesus and food. There are 90 references in Matthew to Jesus and food. Some of the references in Luke chapter 2, we have the manger where Jesus comes for food for the world. Chapter 5, the tax collectors and sinners are at Levi's house with Jesus. In chapter 7, we have Simon and the fishermen and getting the fish. In chapter 9, he's feeding the 5,000. In chapter 10, he's eating at the home of Mary and Martha. Chapter 11, he's at the Pharisees' house and he invites us to invite the poor to the next meal. In chapter 15, the prodigal son returns home, which finishes with a meal. In chapter 16, we've got the story about the rich man and the poor man. In chapter 19, as we see today, he invites himself to Zacchaeus. And in chapter 22, we have the Last Supper. And then at the end, chapter 24, we've got the resurrection, Jesus breaking bread and asking for fish from the fishermen again. Throughout the Bible and the New Testament, Jesus is heading to a meal, he's at a meal, or he's coming from a meal. The Son of Man came is Jesus' mission and methodology. The Son of Man came eating and drinking. We keep ourselves as lost and our sinners, God at arm's length. But how did Jesus bring people closer to him? One meal at a time. Jesus was preaching the gospel, the wide availability of the kingdom to all. If Jesus had a method, it would involve a meal. We Christians and non-Christians alike, we are on edge. We have had bad experiences. We've had cultural difficulties. We feel sometimes that we're not good enough. Sometimes when we want to invite other people, we use excuses like, I don't have a home that I can share. But sometimes all you need to do is invite yourself to someone else's house and pay for the meal. To have a meal, to eat and to drink, to have wine if that's your thing, and when it runs out, move to water. Well, it worked for Jesus. Spend time with people that no religious leader would be caught with. And talk. Use the small talk. Talk about the meaning of life. Ask questions, answer questions. Allow God to work through you. Love people and invite them to experience the life that has become normal for you as Christians. Have that hospitality that is radically ordinary. Now, what is hospitality? Well, I've gone a bit too far. Apologies. Hospitality is the relationship of a host towards a guest, wherein the host receives the guest with a small amount of goodwill and welcome. This includes the reception and entertainment of guests. Notice it's not the entertainment of guests. The entertainment is a part of the hospitality of guests, visitors and strangers. We find in the ancient cultures, hospitality involved welcoming a stranger and offering them food, shelter, and safety. In ancient Greece, hospitality was a right, with the host being expected to make sure the needs of his guests were met. Conversely, the guest was expected to abide by a set code of behaviour. We find throughout the Bible and the Old Testament that Hebrews and Israelites praised hospitality to strangers and guests, based largely on the example of Abraham and Lot in the book of Genesis, in chapter 18 and 19. And we know that the Jewish practice is called, and Jonathan, you'll have to correct me later, Hachnasat Ochim, which means welcoming guest. Do you want to pronounce that?
I'm not even sure what you said. So
Well, it's the practice of welcoming guests. And then we find in our Christianity, hospitality is a virtue. We find it in both the New Testament and Old Testament, where if it's the custom of washing feet of visitors, a kiss of peace, or welcoming a stranger as if you're welcoming Jesus himself. We have multiple Bible references that lead towards hospitality. In Romans 12:13, it says, share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. In 1 Peter 4:8, above all, love one another deeply because love covers a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. We should be using our gifts to serve one another, whether that gift being having a home, whether that being that you're a good cook, whether you have the time to serve others, the space. We need to be stewards of that gift. And we show that if we do that, in Hebrews 13:12, we find, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Wouldn't that be amazing if we found out when we go to heaven that some of the strangers we invited into our house were actually angels visiting this earth? And we also find with hospitality that leaders are not exempt from having to display it. It is a requirement of being an overseer. In 1 Timothy 3:2, we see, now the overseer is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperament, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, and able to teach. So I'm expecting an invitation, Tim and Peter, to your house. No, I've already got them. All good. Hospitality, we are commanded to carry out this practice. Another scholar, Simon Carey Holt, said, setting a table, cooking a meal, washing the dishes is a ministry of facilitation. It provides a context in which people of all backgrounds feel loved, welcomed, and where God's Spirit can be at work in our lives. The table, the fast food outlet, the restaurant is a very ordinary place. It's not what you would consider a place of ministry. But we need to make it that place of ministry, that we allow God to do his work in. But again, you may say, Ashley, I can't do that. I only have a one-bedroom apartment. I'm not earning enough money. I'm sharing an apartment. I live with my parents. I've got mismatching dishware. Hospitality is about inclusion. It's about opening your table for everyone. It is a service and it is a worship to God. Now, throughout the New Testament, we see that Jesus is both the host and the guest. And we need to be the same. We need to come to contribute to hospitality being that way of life. In Luke 14, we see a different side of how we can give hospitality. Then Jesus said to his host, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbours. If you do, they may invite you back so that you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you'll be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Jesus said, look to your apprentices, to the disciples, to your fellow Christians. Now, hospitality is almost a radical shift in the society of today. But I say we need to aim hospitality downwards. We need to use it to bring others into the light. This is how the gospel was spread throughout the first century, through hospitality in the early church. They didn't have the internet, they didn't have Google, they didn't have Wikipedia, they didn't have a Billy Graham crusade. They had the home church where they shared a meal together and then spread it from home to home. Eating and drinking is essential to sharing the message. Have we lost this? How can we allow God to work in our places? We know that Jesus is amazing and he assumes the best in all of us. But we are like lost people and are still searching for that path. Jesus said he came from heaven to earth to show the way. Is one of that way adopting each and every one of us through eating and drinking, through a meal? There is no better venue than a home to dialogue. Why did Alpha work? Evangelism shift. All the evangelism that involves eating and drinking and spending time together. Why do home groups work? We need to work at getting involved in hospitality and letting God do the work through us. Meal conversations can start it all. But am I asking too much? Maybe. But it is something that we're already doing. You're all eating, right? You're here, you're still looking at me, so you must be alive, you're not dead. You're eating about 3 times a day for some people. That equates to 21 times a week that we can repurpose to allowing God to work through us. Could we meet someone for breakfast? Could we meet someone on the way to work? Could we ask a colleague to lunch? Could we meet up for happy hour on the way home? Could we invite a neighbour to dinner? Throw a block party? You don't need to add something to your busyness. Just unlock your front door and allow God to work. Everyone can do this. We sometimes confuse hospitality with entertainment. Again, we come up with excuses of why we can't give hospitality. I live at home with my parents. I live in a dorm with roommates. My apartment or home is a mess. I don't know how to cook. I'm an introvert. I don't like to entertain. I don't like people. I have little kids that need to go to bed early. Or my home is small, or furniture is used IKEA or hand-me-downs. Some people might think that hospitality is a female role, that you have to be a married woman to give hospitality, or it's not for me. I'd like to give some answers to some of those excuses. My house is a mess. Well, it gives you a good opportunity to clean and tidy your house if people are coming over. I don't know how to cook. Most people have access to their phones, Google recipes, or maybe go to their local takeouts. But if you invite people for hospitality at homes and you're learning to cook, you've got a ready-made guinea pigs to show you if you can cook okay. Invite your flat roommates to a meal. Find a table, maybe not yours. Invite yourself over to someone else's. Go out if you need to. You don't need a theology degree. You just need to provide the opportunity to express love for God to work through you. Have no agenda. Just be who you are and be present with those you are with. As we move out of our message today, please come next week. Murray is speaking on preaching the gospel. And just to reiterate the invitation to name our house this afternoon between 12 and 12:30. Bring a plate. If you don't have a plate to bring, that is fine. I'm sure there'll be enough food. But I do want to finish today with a video that is centred around the US Thanksgiving tradition, but I think is really appropriate for today. And it finishes with a question that I will leave with you. Thanks, Ash.
Look, I booked these tickets weeks ago. How does this happen?
Sir, we have a lot of factors going on, and besides that, I can't...
What about another flight? I'll take a red-eye or an early morning flight.
Sir, as I've explained, there is nothing else available.
What's your name again?
Judy.
Judy. Judy, there has to be ways around this.
Sir, I've already told you. We've checked the schedule, scoured the schedule, the
I
flight
have
time.
to get
Sir, there is
back
nothing
home.
left.
Can I talk to your supervisor? I know there's someone above you. I don't mean that disrespectful. There has to be someone above you. Can I speak to that person? I sat on this phone for an hour and a half.
Sir, you're in luck. You're talking to the supervisor.
You're the supervisor. Then
Absolutely.
okay. Then okay. Are you close to your mom, Judy?
I don't feel comfortable discussing my family with you.
I didn't mean it that way. I'm just saying, Judy, I have to get home. I have to. My mom, okay? My mom has had the roughest year, and I have to get home. Judy.
Sir, I realize this is an incredible inconvenience for you, but there is nothing we can do.
So you're saying I'm spending Thanksgiving alone? That's what you're saying. Is that what you're saying? That I'm spending Thanksgiving alone? Just say it. Say it for me. That I'm spending Thanksgiving alone. There's nothing you can do.
Sir. With all due respect, sir, you are not the only person spending Thanksgiving alone.
May I help you? Got your... Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, sure. Sure. Come on in. Yeah, great. Oh, Fred, okay, thank you. Go ahead and have a seat.
Sorry, someone decided to take a late nap.
No problem.
Want to give them the flowers?
These are for me?
Thank you for having us.
No, make yourself at home.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Hi. Oh, wow. You brought, this is so great. Hello, welcome. Oh, you got pizza. That's awesome. I love that. Thank you. Oh, they're hot, too. Hi. A coffee shop. So sorry, I almost forgot. The turkey.
Brought the bird. We'll all sit down and gather around on Thanksgiving Day.
What'd you just say?
I'm sorry, but what I said is that you're not the only person alone this Thanksgiving.
So, how long does it take to cook a turkey?